All right, I'll just tell you a little bit about these two so we can launch right into this. We're here, of course, with Natalie Goldberg, who I think it's safe to say is a writing guru. She has written at least 15 books, including poetry, essays, and memoir. She's also a painter and a frequent presenter for many organizations, including Kripalu, Shambhala, and Naropa, among many, many others. Her books include Old Friend from Far Away, Wild Mind, The Great Spring, The True Secret of Writing, and perhaps the book that really launched her as a writing guru, Writing Down the Bones. All of these books are available on our website. That's right, she usually lives in northern New Mexico, but right now she's hanging out in Washington State. Yippee. She'll be chatting with Scott Wiggerman. He is the author of poetry collections, including Leaf and Beak, which are sonnets, presents, and vegetables and other relations. He's the founding editor of Dos Gatos Press, which was founded in the best city in Texas, Austin. And we're very lucky now that Dos Gatos is based right here on the west side of Albuquerque. So Scott and his partner David Meishin manage that, as well as the monthly poetry workshop co-hosted by Bookworks, Wing Beats Poetry Workshop, which you can find on our own event calendar. He's widely published in haiku and other poetry in many literary journals, and recently he was conducted into the Texas Institute of Letters. Thank you both for joining us. I think Natalie is going to start out with the little reading and then she'll talk to Scott. Hey, Natalie, thanks for being here. What have you got for us today?
Thank you very much. I want to say that I'm happy to be here. I'm only here for 2 months. At the end of April, I'm driving back home to New Mexico. I'm maid of New Mexico at this point. So I'm really happy to be here. And I forgot that we planned it. Amanda and I planned it that Scott would come, which I'm delighted about because he wrote a haiku. The book had already pretty much been done, but he wrote a haiku in the monthly haiku group in Santa Fe that I just dropped dead from. And so I contacted him and asked if I could use it, but I put it in and it didn't quite fit because the trajectory had already happened. But I just asked him, does he remember it so he could recite it for you? And of course, I don't remember it. He doesn't remember it because it was well over a year ago. So that's what haiku is like. Also, I heard that Hilda Raz is here. And I didn't know she moved to New Mexico. And I know her name from Nebraska. I'm very, very fond of Nebraska. And a great writer, African writer, is there now in Lincoln, Nebraska, who I read all his books and had my students read, Chigozie Obiama. So if you get a chance, The Fisherman would be your first book. It's fabulous. So I'm advertising Nebraska now. So welcome, Hilda. I didn't know. Thank you. And I'm sure there are other people. Thank you all for coming. Here's my pretty new book. 3 Simple Lines. And it's about haiku, but it's really about me going back and studying the ancient haiku writers who began haiku in Japan. And so the root of it. And my interest was partially that they followed the way of a haiku, like a path, like I followed the Zen path for my life. And it was very, it was really great. It was very inspiring, but it was also tough, I want to say, because I did a lot of research. I probably read 50 books. I didn't do research on the computer. I read books. And I had to weave all of it together about my life, about going back to Japan several times and following Basho's path, finding a woman haiku writer, because I'd heard about the boys, but I wanted to find some women. And also, well, there's a secret at the end with that in the epilogue, which I don't know if Scott will bring up or not, but I'm going to read you a little about first, because we have a lot of ideas about haiku. And I'm going to read you this to begin with. Okay? Allen Ginsberg, the poet, first introduced me to haiku. There are 4 great Japanese haiku writers, he declared, holding up a finger for each one as he named them in front of the class in summer 1976. We were at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. Basho, Busan, Issa, Shiki. No women, I thought. Okay, I'd take the boys on and learn what I could from them. Sure, there were some women hidden in history. He also told us that the formal 5 syllables, then 7, then 5, often taught in Western schools, does not necessarily work in English. In Japanese, each syllable counts. They don't have the, and, those articles of speech. So he encouraged us not to worry about the count if we write or translate haiku. Only make sure the 3 lines make the mind leap. The only real measure of a haiku, Allen told us that one hot July afternoon, is upon hearing one, your mind experiences a small sensation of space. He paused. I leaned in breathless, which is nothing less than God, he said. Which I never forgot. This was in 1976. And I curate a lot of Japanese haiku writers, the old ones. And one of my longtime students said, why didn't you write this before and let us know? I said, it doesn't work that way. It rises when it rises. I just carried it. So I'm going to read you just a little more because I know, and then it'd be nice, Scott, if at some point I read some of the haiku here so they hear the mind leap. Maybe I should read you a few haiku now so you can feel if your mind leaps. And don't worry if often mine goes like this. I hear the haiku and I go, huh? Oh, huh? Oh, it takes a moment. So I'll read you a few. Oh, and I want to say another thing about haiku. I'm going to read from the first sentence in the book. Haiku is a refuge when the world seems chaotic, when you're lost, frightened, tangled, and nothing is clear. It really, during the pandemic especially, grab a haiku book, but the translation counts. If you're reading other languages and the translation, if you pick up a bad translation of haiku, you'll put it down and think you don't like haiku. So I'm going to read you a few of these. Peeling a pear, a trickle of sweet juice along the blade. Peeling a pear, a trickle of sweet juice along the blade. That's Shiki. The evening cool, knowing the bell is tolling our life away. The evening cool, knowing the bell is tolling our life away. Issa. Dear, dear, what a fat, happy face it has. This peony. Issa. You know, they can be funny too. You know, Issa is probably the most beloved of the Japanese haiku writers. And I read a haiku by Busan that stopped my heart. I want to, let's see if I can find where, oh, here it is. Okay, I'm going to not just read the haiku, I'm going to read how I got to it. I met Busan in 1993 when I'd gone for the weekend, back when it was funky and cheap to Ojo Caliente, a hot spring spa in northern New Mexico. We rented a small cottage replete with pale yellow linoleum floors, creaky doors, lumpy bed, painted wood knobs on cabinets, and a kitchen with formica counters, square table, and 4 matching yellow chairs, all for $48 a night. I even schlepped in a hibachi for barbecuing steaks on the back porch. Almost as an afterthought, as I darted out my back door for the weekend, I grabbed R.H. Blythe's Haiku Volume 1, Eastern Culture. Ginsberg had said, "Get Blythe if you want a good translation." When we hit Ojo, I immediately became ensconced in the Blythe book. The first day passed with my nose rarely out of it. This was not the original plan. I was with a new girlfriend. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway. My attention manifested like this. "Hey, listen to this haiku," I read aloud. The lightly freckled Irish skin around my girlfriend's eyes crinkled. Her upper lip showed her small teeth in a half smile. She said nothing. I ignored any signs of discontent. My new girlfriend, on the second morning of our 3-day weekend, realized the only way to get through to me was with haiku. At breakfast over scrambled eggs, cheese, and tortillas, she burst out, "Kiss me, you fool, winter is coming." My head jerked up. I grabbed her. The next day, I was at it again, soaking in the old hot springs, the sun nakedly glaring down, my hair dripping, a wet towel around my shoulders. I opened the book again. In the bottom left corner, a haiku. "Ah, grief and sadness. The fishing line trembles in the autumn breeze."
Mm.
October poured through the aspens and over the rocks. I stared into the far distance, then looked down at the page. The haiku was written by Busan. I vowed then and there in that northern New Mexico hot springs that if I ever went to Japan again, I'd find Busan's grave and pay homage. It took 19 years before I had the opportunity to fulfill my vow. So some of the book is also about me finding Busan's grave. I do that with writers and painters I love. I've traveled all over. People think it's weird, but I don't know why, because you go to your mother and father, your grandmother, your aunt's grave and visit it. So I visit graves of writers. And it was a little weirder to go find Busan's grave since he was from the 17th century. You know, usually they're still, you know, from this century or the 20th century. I didn't know if he would understand me when I talked to him, but I did find it. I found Basho's grave, and I went to Shiki's home. There's a lot in here. I'll read you maybe before Scott. I guess he has a lot of questions. I'll read you a few from Chiyo-ni, the woman haiku writer I found. I didn't mark it, of course. I should have. Oh, and there's a whole chapter in here about going to the Santa Fe haiku writers group that meets once a month. And Scott was in it. That's how I met Scott. Where do I meet Chiyo-ni? I apologize. Here it is. This is when she was old, and I'm just open to this, and her health was suffering. My energy can only defeat a butterfly this spring morning. Beautiful, huh? Okay, I'm going to read you a few more of hers. The morning glory. The truth is, the flower hates people. You know, this was taught a lot in the Japanese public schools. And my friend Mitsue said, we read it, but we had no idea that Chiyo-ni was a woman. It was never announced. Here's some more by Chiyo-ni. Till his hat fades into a butterfly, I yearned for him. Women's desire, deeply rooted, the wild violets. Change of kimono, showing only her back to the blossom's fragrance. And then because she became a nun at 50, a Zen nun, but didn't stay in the monastery. And in Japan, she was around the same time as Busan in the 17th century. If you were a nun, you could wander if you didn't go into the monastery. So she would go to all kinds of gatherings of haiku writers, and she was free to go to all men's haiku gatherings, and she could just write with them, with the boys. And she went to one, they all waited for the full moon to rise. Haiku is a very communal act, and they all wrote together about the full moon. And she wrote one, and she won the prize. This evening, since the crescent moon, I've been waiting. She never mentions the full moon. So I could go on, and it was very hard to write this book and very good. And I'm glad it's over. Came out about 2 months ago. It's my latest book. Okay, Scott, do you want to?
So that's a good segue. And I'm going to start off with the most obvious question, which is, what was your inspiration for writing the book, and what do you intend readers to take away from it?
Oh, well, my inspiration, I don't think ahead of time. I came back from a trip to Japan when I found Busan's grave. So of course I probably wanted to write about it. So I started doing writing practice, and I thought, this is going to be a book. I kept doing it. I like writing to be a surprise and a discovery, because if I know ahead of time, why do it? It's no fun. So I was going, and I wrote about 25 pages, and I thought, I knew where I was going. And I carried Ginsberg, and I've read a lot of haiku, but never dawned on me. And then after 25 pages, I found out I had cancer. So I went through cancer, and I wrote, while I had cancer, The Great Spring, which was essays that I wanted, if I didn't survive, to go to have published, so you could know the life, climbing to the stone lions in Bandelier and playing ball with my father, because I didn't want to lose myself in cancer, looking up research for cancer and driving myself crazy. I had this other world to go to, writing. And then when I found out I was going to survive, I see something, maybe, it's a spot on the computer. And then when I learned I was going to survive, I wrote directly about cancer. Great Spring, I don't mention it. Then I wrote directly about cancer. And it's called Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. And my partner had cancer at the same time, which was unbelievable. And then when I was okay and I knew I was safe, I thought, well, maybe I'll pull out those 25 pages. And I hoped that they weren't good, because I didn't want to do another book. And when I read them, I thought, oh, there's energy here. So I wrote this book, and I consider it the third book in my cancer trilogy, though you wouldn't know that. I don't mention cancer in my first book, in Great Spring, or this book, but it's my personal trilogy.
Huh.
That's a big way to answer a question. And what I hope people get out of it is that they understand the truth and depth of haiku. It's not just something good for grammar school. It's practice. and it could blow your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. What surprised you most about haiku when you first started studying it?
Well, after Ginsberg, I didn't study it before that, and because
Uh-huh.
Ginsberg really gave me the key in. Um, I think the thing that most surprised me was its depth and how it worked with the mind, and
And how
how
much you can get into just 3 short lines.
exactly 3 lines and the whole world drops away. And
Mm,
that's what's so liberating, especially during the pandemic, because we're so lost in our suffering and other people's and everything. Doesn't mean it doesn't expose suffering in this book, but it's not my suffering. It's empty of personal suffering. Even if it talks about someone suffering there. And I
but it's
go
also universal.
exactly, but it's not universal like uh, heaven and earth. It's specific. It's right on and specific. And I also put in the book the four, at least two of the great Japanese haiku writers, Issa and Shiki, their life biography. And when you meet Shiki, Shiki had TB and coughed up his first blood at 13 and
Mm,
died in his early 30s, but kept writing haiku. And the last 5 years of his life, he was in such pain that he was bedridden. And every morning he'd wake up and drag himself to the edge of the tatami and spend the day looking out at the garden, waiting for haiku. That is determination. So it really inspired me. I really
mm.
fell in love with Shiki. And it's really why we have haiku now. He died in 1902. And it's like he threw it out into the 20th century.
Yeah, excellent. Uh, this is a question that somebody else gave me for you. And it's, what do you have to say about the need for a turn or a pause, what many haiku writers refer to as the aha moment that divides the two images in a haiku? And I'm going to add this on page 91. You claim it's easy to place too much value on the leap. So
Thanks.
talk about the need for the turn or leap, a feature that keeps haiku from being read as a single sentence.
Well, Scott, I'm glad you gave me the page because all those years, I should read some of it because it's fun. Plus, the idea of haiku leap becomes too materialistic, creates grasping in the writer, me, and in the reader. It's easy to place too much value on that leap, to want something beyond what is. Trying too hard can kill the soul of what's being written. A haiku is bigger than one thing, I tell myself. Don't try to contain it. Yet there is structure. So I'm glad you said that because I realized that some haiku, for instance, the very famous one, which I write about in here by Basho, that is beloved in Japan. It's the holy of haikus. Old pond, frog jumps in, plop. They have many translations.
Right.
Ancient pond, frog leaps in, water sound. Anyway, I didn't get it. And I spent a year looking for working with it, almost like a Japanese koan in Zen.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And at the end of the year, I had a really big insight in a dentist's office in the waiting room. And I write about it here. So some haiku you have to work with a long time. There's another one in here, Basho's death haiku. In the haiku world, right before you die, you write a haiku to show your state of mind facing death. And I studied Basho's haiku for a long time because everyone said it was so great and I couldn't get it. So yes, it's really nice to have that leap. but it can get materialistic. And I realized that hearing that from Ginsberg since 1976, it became too much. You know, the haiku is bigger than that. And yet it's lovely to have that leap. But
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes they're very subtle and quiet.
Well, and I like that you say that, sometimes you can look at that same haiku over and over and over and over for years. And then all of a sudden, that aha moment hits you. It's like, oh, this is what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, there's at least 100 haiku that I curated in this book, really great Japanese haiku. But when I reread it sometimes to give a reading, I'm like, oh, wow, that's a really good haiku. You forget about it. And then it comes home again.
Yeah, it's really kind of nice because this book is in a lot of ways a small introduction to some of the greatest haiku that came out of Japan.
Yeah,
So,
the root haikus. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really pretty cool. I'm going to bring this question in because this is something we were just talking about. I've seen at least 36 different or slightly different translations of that famous Basho haiku, and there's probably more than 36. So how do you choose which translation to read when you have no knowledge of Japanese? When you don't know the original language, because you can't really compare it.
Yeah, no, beautiful question. And very subtle in some ways, Scott.
That's not usually my style.
I go, well, it must be on some level because you write some beautiful haiku. So it's your secret back.
There we go. My secret superpower.
No, but it's quiet in the back. Yeah, and that might be your superpower. Let's see. Well, I go to Blythe. I go to, what's his name? Robert Haas. He did a book of great translations.
Yeah,
I go to some people that I know that are usually poets or Blythe, but have really good translations. But, the one that I read you by Blythe about Busan, I'll say it again for people in case they didn't remember it. Ah, grief and sadness. The fishing line trembles in the autumn breeze. I showed this to Kaz Tanahashi, who's Japanese, and he put up his nose and said, too romantic, too sentimental.
Because of the translation.
Yeah, well, of course, because
Yeah.
So you don't know what can be great for us and wake us up. And that's all we have finally. How does it feel to you?
Yeah.
But
you
the
write.
more you read it, the more educated you get. Yeah, I don't need to say whoopee, anything. Go ahead.
So you write that the way of haiku is bare attention, no distractions, pure awareness, noticing only what is in the moment, which to me sounds a lot like Zen. Do you find that Zen feeds into haiku, or that haiku feeds into Zen?
Good.
There seems to be some kind of symbiosis there.
There is. And actually, Basho, Busan, Chiyo-ni, and Issa and Shiki, not so much Shiki, had spent time in Zen monasteries, but they didn't stay. But I want to say that you'll meet Harada Roshi in here. There are all kinds of stories and visits to Japan, but you meet Harada, and when the book was done, he became a close friend. He was the best friend of my Zen teacher who died in 1990. I sent the book immediately to him overnight to Japan. You can imagine how much that cost. And he doesn't read Japanese, he doesn't read English, but he was so excited about it, and he was very verbal about it. We got on the phone 3 ways with Mitsue and Harada. Mitsue translates for me. And he said, he knew it, he understood the book completely. And we said, how can you read this book? You don't speak English. And he said, I read what I cannot read. And he
Huh.
said, this is true Japanese. This is Japanese Zen, and this is the Japanese people. And I think what he was saying is that it's all integrated. We separate it. Japanese practice, haiku, Japanese culture, but to the Japanese, it's all integrated.
Yeah.
So it's very different.
Yeah. I have a question here that this is something that popped into my head as I was reading through the book, and that's that you seem to have an ecstatic, transformative reaction to haiku, which reminded me of a lot of the mystical Eastern writers like Hafiz and Rumi. So other than haiku, what kinds of writing do you find send you into ecstasy?
Any good writing.
Not just haiku then.
Oh, no, no. I mean, I just have read great books and then I teach them. And I love to
Uh-huh.
teach too, sends me into ecstasy, teaching. But great books, literature class, literature.
With a capital L.
Yeah, a great writing, great books, great poetry.
Well, this is related, this question. One of the things that struck me was your sheer openness to learning about haiku. You just seemed like an open sponge waiting to take everything in. And this seems to be your approach to learning in general. You say in there, or Shoha says, it is best if you acquire haiku naturally. And your approach to take in all this that you hear and read helped me understand your initial quietness when you came to the haiku study group in Santa Fe. Because I felt at first like I wasn't sure what you were doing there. And I don't think you knew perhaps what you were doing there. But I felt not when I read the book, I realized, oh, she was just taking it all in. And is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't aware that I was that quiet, but I was quiet. And I liked being the dumbest person in the class. And that isn't negative. In Zen, being dumb is very good. It's a practice. I like I liked being the person the least knowledge. And people were so nice to me, and no one acted like I was this well-known writer. And so because I'm always the teacher, and it was so much fun in the class.
Well, part of that might be because, haiku, the whole haiku world is a little different from the rest of literary communities.
Yeah.
And these people, a lot of them have really studied it. So they feel like they are the smart one.
They were, and they were writing great haikus. And I just didn't get how to enter it. I'd written a few, but I just kept thinking there was something outside myself, which is not true, that you can't begin that way. But and they kept pulling me aside. They're very sweet. As we would leave, they'd say, if you want to learn haiku, read a lot of haiku and write a lot of haiku. And I thought, that's what I tell my students. I wanted it to be some other thing, magical in some new way, but it wasn't. It's work. It's practice.
Yeah. Oh, it's work. Yeah, for sure. Let's see if I can find that question. This is very directly related to that. Oh, here it is. Basho has claimed, and you referenced it in your book, that if you write 5 haiku in a lifetime, 5, you are a haiku writer. And that if you write 10, you are a master. Where do you find yourself along this continuum?
I'm not a haiku writer yet. I haven't even begun. I've written a few. I have about 2 or 3 in the book, and I was scared to put them in. And I'm not even a haiku writer yet, if according to Basho. But that's scary, because when you read that, you get scared and think you shouldn't write them. But I think he meant,
Keep trying.
keep trying, exactly. Scott,
Yeah.
I was thinking, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Uh-huh.
Would you just tell us 1 or 2 of your haiku? Your really killer ones. Now that has put him on the spot. But I think it'd be nice to hear, because one of the things, as he's looking, I want to say to people, I had no idea, but people all over the country and the world
The
are
world.
writing haiku. And any month you can find a haiku conference in this country that is going on. It's really a big deal. And I hope that's partially, I want them to have a good foundation. I don't want the US to bring it into what sometimes we water down things. I want it to
So,
be.
okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is an anthology I'm reading right now called All the Way Home, Aging in Haiku. Somehow that's a really close to the heart subject. So I've got a few haiku in this one, and here's one of them. Creaking vigas in a Taos motel. Dreams of old growth. Creaking vigas in a Taos motel. Dreams of old growth.
Give us another one. Thank you.
Here's another one. Worn down souls on a well-trod path. Year's end. Worn down souls on a well-trod path. Year's end.
And souls is
SOLES.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yes.
And what's nice about this, Scott, I feel the echo of the old Japanese haiku masters in that one.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a lineage. It's a lineage.
It is. And I think that's true of literature in general. There's a progression, and you can't just write in complete isolation without the past, without what preceded.
Yeah. And one of the things that's wonderful about haiku is that it's a community thing. Like Busan loved Basho. Busan was born a few years after Basho died, but he considered him his master. And he went to look for Basho's hut at the beginning of Mount Hiei. And when he found the spot, it was just a heap of dirt. So he called in all his haiku friends and disciples, and they built the hut and made a vow that they would, once a year, they would all meet there for a weekend, drink sake, and write haiku together. And then Busan, when I went to find his grave, he's buried on top of the hill near Basho's grave, Basho's hut. And when I went up there, Busan's grave, and then I saw a circle of stones around it. And I thought, what's going on? I found out that was his disciples. When they died, they chose to be buried near their teacher.
How cool.
I mean, it was very beautiful. And I didn't know all this. It took a lot to discover this stuff, because it's all in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese, and a lot of it is hidden. And it's such a different culture.
Now, here's a question, and a lot of, if you're sitting here listening to this conversation, a lot of you may not know that there is haiku and there is senryu. And senryu focuses a little bit more on human conditions as opposed to haiku, which is generally a little bit more nature oriented. So, but of course, humans are a part of nature. So to me, a lot of senryu is haiku. And when you are submitting haiku to journals, some of them you have to separate it, because there's different editors for the haiku and there's different editors for the senryu. Others just lump it all together because they don't, it's hard to tell the difference. At any rate, my question related to that is, at one point in the book, you write, haiku asks for a spirit that's not so human-centered. And I noticed that throughout the book, you have a strong preference for haiku over senryu. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think that's my training as a Zen person, that it's not so personal oriented. Even if you write something personal, it's empty of an individual self, but it's not abstract or general, but it has that orientation. I've practiced Zen for almost 45 years, and not lightly,
Yeah. Okay, so that is helpful to know. I have a question here about the title of your book. And as I was reading through it, I thought, is that title, Three Simple Lines, meant to be ironic?
Maybe so.
I just wondered.
Yeah.
If that had crossed your mind. I noticed also in the moon that's on the cover, there's 3 branches in it, which is pretty cool.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Thank you. This is actually, and it says so on the back flap, this cover is from an ancient drawing in the 18th or 17th century in Japan. But I didn't notice there were 3 branches. What a smart graphic person. 3. No, I think I'm so earnest sometimes. I heard it as 3 simple lines. But you are so right. There's some irony in it too. Thank you.
Because it's never all that simple.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Haiku often looks simple, but it's not.
Yeah.
I came into it from my last book was all sonnets, and I thought sonnets had a lot of rules. And then I moved into haiku, and it's like, oh my God, there's more rules with this than there are with sonnets, and they're harder to write. I can write 14 lines easier than I can these 3.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So what's a topic you've always wanted to write a haiku about, but never have?
Oh.
And where do you write most of your haiku?
I just write them accidentally when I'm walking around, or
Walking.
Walking does it for me.
Yeah, that's what does it for me too.
Yeah, but I have to say, I'm not a haiku writer. People think, oh, it's a book of my haiku. It's really me studying.
Yes.
And
I think that comes across.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And if you read the epilogue, which I didn't know till 2 months after. 2 months after I wrote the book, an epilogue came. I love epilogues. And I kept thinking, this has nothing to do with the book, Natalie. You can't put it in. And I said, okay, write it and you'll see. And it does work, but it's quite a leap. And I didn't know when I wrote the book or after I wrote the epilogue for a while, the whole book is an homage to Allen Ginsberg, because he's only mentioned at the very beginning, but he had a deep influence on me. I carried that forever. And I love teachers. He was my teacher.
Well, I even have a question here about that. Talk about Ginsberg as one of the greatest influences on your writing life. And I love that that short haiku at the end, AG, far beyond 17 syllables. So true.
Do I have AG or do I have Allen Ginsberg?
You have AG.
I do? That is
I
so
think so.
No, I can't. That's not like me. That's too hip. No. I have Allen Ginsberg.
Okay, that was my abbreviation then, writing it on my notes. Sorry.
No, that's okay. If I was in the group a year ago, I would have said, "Oh, is that what I'm supposed to do? Put AG instead of Allen Ginsberg."
Oh, that's true.
Scott.
So I want to move into one other area of the book that we haven't really talked about. And that's, a good part of this book is a fascinating travelogue through Japan and through different parts and locales in Japan. I mean, a lot of them are related to those haiku masters, but what is it about Japanese culture that you miss the most while you're here in the States? And what about Japanese and customs would you like to see more of here in the States?
Oh, well, I don't miss anything.
No?
No, because I have Zen. I have my inner life of Zen. But I would love in the States, putting on a mask wasn't very natural to me because in Japan, when you're ill or sick and you go out, you wear a mask. And I thought that was so courteous and wonderful. And it's so embarrassing here that they made it into a political thing. When I speak to my Japanese friends in Japan, they can't understand. It's incomprehensible.
I mean, people are getting shot for it.
Simply wearing a mask, what the production is. So I miss that. And I miss, the deep culture there, which is really Zen and tea ceremony. It's not that prevalent. It's a noisy place there and very busy. You really have to, but I appreciate what they've given me. And I got to study with a great Japanese Zen master.
Well, they certainly seem to revere you.
Yeah, we get along well, but because I understand, I come from that Zen place. I can shut up because they really honor silence and they honor emptiness, something we don't even mention. And loneliness is really understood in Japan.
Yeah.
Scott, maybe we should open it up to people. I know some people maybe have questions. I don't know. Amanda, how can we do that? Can you?
Amanda will be in charge.
Okay.
I will be in charge of the moderating. Thank you so much. There were some fascinating tidbits there. I think for me, the idea that Natalie Goldberg is not a haiku writer, I'm going to be thinking about that for a minute. Okay, so the first question we have in the chat is from Elaine, and Elaine is tuning in from Maine. She wants to know, why do some haikus not follow the 5-7-5 rule?
Okay, I thought I read that at the beginning, but I'll say it, and it's also in the book, is that because we have much more syllables than Japan, and they don't carry a lot. And in Japan, they don't have those kind of syllables. So when they say 5 syllables, those are powerful syllables. So instead the test sometimes is that leap.
And their syllables are not the same as what we call syllables either. So they could count a syllable as a pause in their haiku.
Oh, interesting. So the absence of a actual.
Right. And they have words that are in there and places that indicate that kind of cutting and pausing, and that counts. So the count comes differently than it does in English.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then Dale, another writer we have joining us today, she wants to know what your take is on titling haiku. Is it distracting? Not necessary? Is it a good thing? What do you two think about that?
Mostly you're not supposed to. But if you have one that you're aching to put a title, but don't use the words that are also already in the haiku. You know,
Of
'cause
course,
that,
that's good advice for any kind of poetry.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
I would agree with that. There's no point usually to the title. If you really want to do a title, write a haibun, which do have titles.
Okay. All right. And then Kathy has a question. If 575 isn't a rigid rule, other than the leap, can you distill a haiku rule into something simple? And I was sort of wondering about this too. You both talked about the concept of haiku and what makes haiku. So it has a leap. It might be around about nature versus the sinru being about people. And then there are the syllables. Are there other so-called rules that make a haiku?
Just practice, and what you read, practice, write them a lot, and then come back, like a year later, a month later, and reread them, the ones that have energy, that leap off the page, that aren't a dead fish.
And for me, one of the really primary things that I was never taught when I learned about haiku in grade school, high school, was the idea of juxtaposition, where you're juxtaposing two different ideas or two different images up against each other, and one influences the other. And that's part of what creates that aha moment. It's like, oh, I never thought of this being related to this, and it is.
Fascinating. So there's a little bit of drama involved then, it sounds like.
Yeah.
All right. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to pose to either of these haiku writers or non-haiku writers? Okay.
I have a final question for Natalie,
Okay.
which is, and this is purely for me, there's a place in your book called, now I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, Naoshima, the Art Island.
Oh, now
which I just was fascinated by. It's like, oh my God, I want to go there. I never really wanted to go to Japan before, but I read about that and I thought, oh my God, that I have to see this. What would you say from your experiences over there are the essential places you should visit if you go there?
Oh, sometimes it takes you, I've gone to Kyoto at least 4 times. And finally, I used to just think, what is the big deal? And the last time I went, it was, I get it. So sometimes you have to, and who can go to, these places over and over? It takes a long time to penetrate. But
Well, it's a lot like haiku.
yeah, exactly. But now Shima, you'll get the first time. It's an art island, and it's all done by Tao. The design is, how do you say his name? Tado Ando, the great architect. And he does some wild things there, but he brings Korean artists. He brings people from this country. It's an amazing experience, and you'll get it right away. And it's worth going to Japan just to go to Naoshima. You could spend days there.
Yeah. Well, I thought your book was a real boon for the travel industry. You need to be marketing to them, because there's a lot of places in here. It's like, oh my God, I really want to go there.
There you go. We can start marketing Natalie's book on the Japanese tourism websites or something. All right. Does anyone else? Okay, here's one more. Can an attempt at a haiku in English fail because it is too long?
Well, figure out how to make it shorter.
I would say that when we meet in our haiku study group, that's one of the things we always do. Even if it's really short, we end up usually making it a little shorter. It's like every single word, every single syllable should count. And if it doesn't, take it out, get rid of it. But I would definitely say that generally haiku should never, ever be more than 17 syllables. And in most cases, far fewer.